You may have heard the term class 2 or 3 when it comes to slot machines and casinos, but what exactly are these classes? How do they differ? Today, we're going to break down and go over all of the different classes of gaming that you may encounter at any casino or gaming establishment in the United States. Welcome back, everybody, to the Cowboy Slot Channel, where we bring you experienced advice from years of working in the casinos, tips, reviews, and so much more. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell to stay notified for when we come out with future episodes. Now, this is a topic that has come up so many times in our live streams, and a lot of people get really confused about it, and they want to know what kind of machine they're playing. What are all of these classes of gaming that you're hearing about, and where do each of them differ? So today, we're lumping it into one video about all the different types of gaming that you might encounter. We're also going to be talking about which games fall under which class. How do you tell? And some points along the way for if these games are in your jurisdiction. So, classes of gaming were actually established under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1988, which lays out exactly what machines fall under what category in the United States. Now, under this act, there are three major classes of gaming: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. We're going to cover all of those, but we're also going to cover some of those other games that you might encounter that are outside of this agreement, such as VLTs, those virtual lottery terminals, say in Washington State. We'll also cover skill games and historic horse racing as well. So let's start with Class 1 gaming. Now, every time the topic of slot machines and casinos come up, everybody always talks about Class 2 and Class 3. But what exactly is Class 1 gaming? Well, Class 1 gaming actually really does not apply to casinos, which is why you don't hear about it as much. Class 1 gaming, simply put, is going to be tribal traditional games. These are also called hand games or stick games. Usually, casinos never get involved with it. If these games are going on, it's normally a tribal-only affair. Most Class 1 games, you must be a tribal member to participate, and these games are not open to the public. So now let's cover Class 2 gaming, and this one is pretty popular in the United States, and I'm sure most of you out there have encountered Class 2 gaming before. This is going to be those bingo-style machines. Under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, Class 2 includes only the game of bingo, and we're going to get into that. That's really important to remember. Class 2 gaming only covers the game of bingo under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. In accordance with the law, bingo can also be on a digital device. This is the types of slot machines that you might encounter, but they're not really slot machines. These are bingo terminals. They look, feel, act, and play exactly like slot machines. But the key factor here is under the law, they are not considered slot machines. And here's why. With a slot machine is using a random number generator. Every time you push that button, it is pulling random numbers to issue out a win. But with bingo terminals, what it's doing is you are playing the game of bingo. Every time you push that spin button, what the system is doing is it is pulling bingo balls off of a server, and the machine is generating a bingo card. All of the reels and the machine in front of you is purely for an entertainment purpose only. You're actually playing a game of bingo on the back end. You just have a machine in front of you that looks and feels like a slot machine for your entertainment purpose. So every time you push that spin button, the system is going to generate a bingo card, and it's going to pull those bingo balls off the server. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to assign it to a bingo pattern. The balls are going to come down. If you have a winning pattern, it's going to display a win on the reels. Everything in the casino industry is very legal and very legally defined. So this is where it's important. These devices are not independent. They are not random number generated like a slot machine is. And you're actually playing with a group of people. You're getting the same bingo ball pull that other people are getting, those same exact pulls. You just have a different card. Whereas with a slot machine, it's you versus the machine. But instead, in a Class 2 facility, you're playing against other players and you're playing the game of bingo. Did you get a red screen or a red spin? Here's how those work. In short, all a red screen or a red spin is you've matched multiple patterns on multiple bingo cards or multiple patterns on the same bingo card. So what it's going to do is when it goes into that red spin, all it's doing is displaying all of your various bingo win results. This is the biggest takeaway with Class 2 gaming. When you are playing a Class 2 device, you are not playing a slot machine. And it might look like a slot machine, and it might even have some of the same titles as popular slot machines out there. But we cannot stress this enough. It's not a slot machine. It doesn't work the same way, and it does not follow the same regulations. So how do you tell if you're playing a Class 2 style game or a real slot machine? This is a question we do get asked a lot. Majority of the time, it's going to have a bingo card clearly placarded somewhere on the game or clearly displayed somewhere on the game. If it doesn't, all you have to do if you are curious if it is a bingo device or if it's an actual slot machine is to go into the game rules or the help screen and see if there are bingo patterns in that help screen. A lot of casinos like WinStar in Oklahoma, for example, have a mix of Class 2 and Class 3 devices. So if you're at a casino that does have a lot of bingo devices, check the game that you're playing and see, is this Class 2 or is this Class 3? If you don't see a bingo card in it, look on the game rules and see if it is hiding somewhere in those rules. So here are some helpful tips if you're playing in a Class 2 bingo facility on Class 2 bingo style games. The biggest takeaway is you need to treat it exactly the same as if you were playing a traditional game of bingo at a normal bingo hall. This class, unlike slot machines, can be reliant on the crowd size at the time because, again, you are playing with other people, so there's going to be more cards in play or less cards in play. And just like the traditional game of bingo, you're trying to get bingo before somebody else, and you're trying to match those patterns before somebody else does. These Class 2 style devices also differ from slot machines in one big major way, and that is the fact that they do not have their own independent payback percentage return to player programmed on the machine. Typically, in a Class 2 facility, the payback percentage is going to be in unison with every machine on the floor and casino-wide, or within the same server that the games are on, because some facilities do have multiple servers for multiple different games. Changing the bingo card really does not help your odds when it comes to Class 2 facilities, because you really truly don't know what the server is going to pull bingo ball wise. So changing the card is more of just an entertainment factor rather than having any actual functionality. Class 2 games, however, do have some really great rewards. You can tend to win a lot more money at a Class 2 facility than you actually can at a Class 3 facility sometimes. Just always remember too that because you are playing the game of bingo, the prize amounts that you do get are going to fluctuate depending on crowd size or the size of the casino. The bigger the casino tends to be, the bigger the prize amounts. All right, so let's talk about actual real slot machines. This is going to be Class 3 gaming. This is the biggest takeaway from this episode. Class 3 gaming is the only category that actually qualifies as a real slot machine. So anything outside of Class 3 gaming is not considered a slot machine. In order for a slot machine to be legally deemed a slot machine, they must have their own independent internal random number generation system that generates when the player pushes the spin button, and the outcome is random, meaning that the machine does not know what is coming next. Both legally and by design of a slot machine, it cannot have any external factors, any external influence on the gameplay itself and on that random number generator, meaning that there is no outside source that can legally or technically influence that machine in any way. This would be things like your player's card, servers, anything like that. The machines cannot be remotely controlled. They must have a random number generation system internally on their own merit, and that is what qualifies them to legally be considered a slot machine. We did a great interview with one of the game designers who designed some of the most popular games in the world over at IGT. Tap that card in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We're also going to put a link to it in the video description down below to see that full interview where he describes all of this. In a Class 3 facility with slot machines, even if the slot machines are connected to a server, the server can only do very, very basic things, and it cannot have any effect on the game. The machines are built like this at the manufacturer level. This is nothing that the casino can change. About the most the server can do is it can push updates to the machine. However, in order for those updates to become activated, a person has to physically go to the machine, open it, Insert a secure USB key, have Gaming Commission present to unlock the machine because they are the ones with those secure keys, and then accept the changes. So you can know for sure that when you are playing a slot machine in a class 3 facility, a real technical slot machine, and remember, slot machines are only considered class 3. Any other device outside of class 3 is not considered a slot machine. But when you're in a casino, which is most of the casinos in the United States, playing a slot machine, just know that it cannot have any outside influence whatsoever. So now that we've covered all three classes of gaming, let's talk about some other games here in the United States that you might encounter that are kind of outside of this range. And there's a few of them. So let's talk about video lottery terminals, VLTs. These are really common in Washington state. Similar to class 2, virtual lottery terminals can look, feel, and act a lot like slot machines, but they are far from a slot machine. They're probably the furthest from a slot machine that you could possibly get. So how do they work and who controls them? So basically a VLT, a virtual lottery terminal, is essentially a sped up version of you going to the gas station, buying a lottery ticket off of the roll, scratching it off, and revealing a prize or not revealing a prize. And this is kind of what I mean. Unlike slot machines that do not know what the next random number combination is going to be, VLTs actually do know what's coming next. It is essentially like a digital version of a reel of lottery tickets inside of the machine. And every time you push the button, it pulls one off and scratches it for you and displays a win or a loss. VLTs know exactly what's coming next. They know the sequence of events, and they're pre-programmed to have a certain number of winners within each set of games. Now, granted, unlike a book of lottery tickets that might have 50 to 100 cards in it, these machines have thousands of these digital lottery tickets inside of the machine. But just like a roll of lottery tickets that you might buy at a gas station, there's only so many winners that are already preset on that roll. Can you win at them? Yes, but they are so far from the wall of being an actual slot machine. These BLTs are really, really different. So let's talk about who actually controls them if they don't fall under those classes of gaming. VLTs are actually controlled by the state. They're controlled by your state's gaming commission or the lottery commission. That's right, the same people that are controlling Powerball, Mega Millions, and your local scratch-off tickets have full control over those VLT machines. Our biggest advice, if you do have VLTs in your area and you're playing on these virtual lottery terminals, our biggest advice here is really going to be budget. The machine already knows exactly where those winners are. So you need to watch your budget and basically, what would you spend going to a gas station and buying a scratcher ticket? All right, let's talk about historic horse racing machines. These are HHR machines. Now, these type of devices are really growing fast in popularity in the United States. The reason being is because with the way that HHR machines are regulated, they can be in pretty much any place that has horse racing, which is generally about everywhere in the United States. Now, these type of machines do have a lot more in common with those class 2 bingo devices than a virtual lottery terminal would, but there are some differences, so let's talk about how does historic horse racing work. When you push the spin button on an HHR machine, what it's doing is it's going to generate a random selection of horses to run a randomly selected previous historic horse race. On these devices, you can do what is called handicap betting, which is basically where you can pick your own horse. But I kind of liken that to changing the bingo card on a class 2 device because you have no clue what race it's going to pull from history. With these historic horse racing devices, there is a lot more of a random factor than on a VLT machine, but not as much so as on a slot machine or a bingo tournament. Historic horse racing machines are also controlled by the state through what is called parimutuel wagering. Our tips on these devices is to use a fairly low budget when you are playing them, because you can actually win some pretty good money with historic horse racing machines, and typically the bet amounts don't have to be very high to get a pretty good prize. So just watch your budget if historic horse racing machines are something that you would like to play. So let's talk now about skill-based gaming. Kind of like historic horse racing machines, skill-based games can pop up in a lot more places. They can be in places like bars, taverns, and restaurants. We actually have a lot of them here in Wyoming, which is where we're based at. You can typically tell if you're sitting down at a skill-based game because it's going to have a rather different appearance. A lot of times it's going to look more like an arcade game, rather than an actual slot machine. With these games, you can actually preview what the next spin is going to be. So the next spin is not random like a slot machine. You can actually preview it and see what the next spin is. So how exactly do you play these skill-based games, and can you win some money off of them? So with these games, how it works is when the player pushes the spin button, it's going to generate some different squares on the screen. Most of the time it's squares. Some other skill games can appear differently, but with those squares, the player then has to select one of those squares to complete a winning pattern on the screen. That's the skill factor. If a player chooses the wrong square and does not complete the pattern properly, then they will lose, even if it was a jackpot. So always make sure, if you are playing these games, to first understand the game, really understand it, look at all of the symbols, and make sure that you're matching those patterns appropriately, because you can also win multiple ways. So make sure that you're selecting the right square, because if you select the wrong square, then you can lose whatever that payout was going to be. As for budget, don't go too crazy on these. These are really meant as a time killer. That's why they're typically at the bar. And usually with these skill-based games, the wager amounts are very, very low, usually about a quarter to $1. The highest skill-based game that I've ever seen for a wager was $3. So don't go too crazy on it. They're really meant to just pass the time, especially if you're at a bar and you're drinking and you want to just have a little fun. That's what they're intended to do. So with your budget, just watch your budget carefully and don't invest too much money into these skill games. Some closing comments that are very, very critical to understand is that slot machines are only classified under Class 3 gaming, meaning anything outside of that Class 3 gaming is not considered a slot machine. If it's a skill game, if it's HHR, if it's lottery based, if it's bingo based, those are not legally considered slot machines. They do not work the same way as slot machines. They do not rely on a random number generator. It's not you versus the machine. There's other outside influences going into that. So that is the most critical thing to understand when we're talking about classes of gaming, is that only under Class 3 are those considered slot machines. When you're playing on a slot machine in a Class 3 facility, you can utilize a lot more tactics to improve your play, such as focusing on the game's volatility, whereas other machines that are outside of slot machines, that are outside of that Class 3, you really can't utilize a lot of different tactics. As for all of the classes of gaming, budgeting is critical. Make sure that you have an appropriate budget for whatever games you're playing. Thanks so much for watching. Check out these other videos and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more slot tips. It's always free. Visit ropethejackpot.com for free guides and a whole lot more. Catch you on the next episode.